Okay, so I actually have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Dr. Evan Adams is a Coast Salish physician from the Tla'amin First Nation in British Columbia. He obtained his medical degree from the University of Calgary in 2002. I see what they're talking about. It's really dry up here. 2002. Completed his residency at University of British Columbia Aboriginal Residency Program and obtained a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins University in 2009. He was the first ever Aboriginal health physician advisor in the Office of the Deputy Provincial Health Officer in British Columbia and later took on the role of Deputy Provincial Health Officer. In 2014, he was appointed as the Chief Medical Officer of the BC First Nations Health Authority. He's a strong advocate for Indigenous health in Canada and has spoken at numerous national and international conferences. I first met Dr. Adams when he was just a lowly resident coming to Cattery Memorial Hospital, and I was his staff physician. He did okay. He passed. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Evan Adams.
Thanks very much. Yeah, if you, that would be great if there was a place to place this, but otherwise I can just hold it. Thanks for passing me, Kent. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't passed that my Indigenous health rotation at your hospital. I applied to McGill in 1984. Kent, I think you were like a little kid back then. And I actually came here to study biochemistry. I had been to a really great high school that set some really great goals for me. I was really happy to come to Montreal and McGill. Like every kid who grew up in the previous Trudeau era, I believe very much in bilingualism, and I wanted to come to Montreal and speak French. I didn't realize that no one spoke French at McGill. At least not in 1984. And I had a wonderful time as a biochemistry student. But in March, I was walking down Saint Laurent Street, and there was a big poster. It said classes. So it just caught my eye. I just looked, and it actually said acting classes. And I just stood for a second thinking, I know what you do in a science class. I wonder what you would do in an acting class. I wonder, what's the homework like? And this woman came out and she said, are you an actor? And I just lied, I don't know why. I said, yeah. She said, come audition for me tomorrow. So I skipped my genetics class and I auditioned for this movie and I landed it. It was crazy. So I did this, I actually left McGill and I became a professional actor for like 12 years. I thought it was amazing because, when you're an undergrad student, it's pretty difficult work. And being an actor, I had lines like, Toby, we're going to get in trouble. And then, collect $5,000. And yeah. I eventually came back to medicine. But really, all jokes aside, part of the reason I left was because of something I call the Great Red Hope Syndrome. Any young Indigenous person with a bit of brains and a bit of ambition is told, our communities are in trouble, you need to go to school, and you need to help the people. And it's a very heavy burden, especially when you're just a young teenager. And I was really glad, thank you, to be distracted by acting. And I stayed a professional actor into my 30s. And I eventually decided I would apply again to medicine. This first picture is from a movie I did called Smoke Signals, and it's actually one of the main reasons, thank you, one of the main reasons that I get, I think, invited out is because I worked in the arts, and now I work in the sciences, and particularly for universities, this is perhaps a bit of interest to them. And actually, I'm really lucky because lots of Indigenous people have seen this movie, Smoke Signals. In fact, it opened the same weekend I started medical school at the University of Calgary. And I had no idea that people were seeing it until I was put on the obstetrics ward. And no, actually, I was a peds. I was covering peds. And whenever there was a prolonged labor, as the family resident covering peds, I would have to try and help babies in respiratory distress. So I went there, and there was an Indigenous woman one night laboring. And the dad was freaking out, as they always are. And I didn't want to talk him down because he was saying, help us, the baby's coming. Even though I knew it was a prolonged labor. And remember, I was there not to help the obstetrician, but to help peds. And so I just went and I stood nearby to catch the baby if I needed to. And many months later, she came up to me, this woman, this beautiful woman. She said, do you remember me? And I said, no, I don't remember. That night, you probably look a lot different 6 months postpartum than you do mid-labor. She said, remember, I was pushing, I was swearing. It hurt so much. And then I opened my eyes, and there was Evan Adams standing between my legs. She knew me as an actor from Smoke Signals, and not as a resident or as a doctor. Anyway, I digress. My gosh, that was way too long. So thank you, all of you who made this visit for me possible. I really wanted to come here because I love Montreal, I love McGill, I actually love Kent, even though, my gosh, it almost killed me on my rotation. And I really wanted to wish you well, because I've been lucky to watch a few organizations, including post-secondary institutions, look at reconciliation. Basically, the idea of being good neighbors to Canada's original peoples. And I think it's a lovely endeavor, and one that should be absolutely supported. This is a picture of an island in my territory. It's in my language called Ayus. In English, it's called Savory Island. And this island, if you cut it along its long spine, one half is completely undeveloped, and that's the part of the island still in our possession. And the other half is now in private ownership, about 3,000 postage-sized stamp pieces of real estate. Very, very beautiful island. And it's very interesting because I grew up playing on this island, and I had no idea there was a white side. It's kind of hilly in the middle, and you have to go over the hill to see white people. And they have to come over the hill to see us on the beach. And to me, it's like what's the word? I always forget in English. It's a metaphor for Canada. That, Indigenous people, Canada, and we're like, like we say in Quebec, the two solitudes. And I thought, well, why can't we meet in the middle and have fun and be nice to each other, and not, say, fight over the water table or fight over who owns the beach. I also like to remind people that Canada has Indigenous roots. It means that there were people here, and certainly we were here. We were here when Canada was formed. This is my family, and I grew up very much like any Indigenous person in this country. That's me in my dad's lap. And I've only just started to tell people after talking about Indigenous realities for decades, that one of my sisters died when I was a boy. She was shot by the boy next door. And it was a very traumatic experience, and it really defined my early childhood. Classic post-traumatic stress disorder, watching my sister die, and there were no adults. And the good part of it is that the whole rest of my family, we work now as helpers, helping people in service of others. But what was really ingrained in me, I was almost 6 years old, I knew people were supposed to help us. I knew that, when she was dying, when my parents were grieving and completely falling apart, that there should be people to help us. And that actually eventually became my work, to help communities organize. Because children getting hurt, people passing away, accidents, setbacks to human health are absolutely a part of everyday reality for our communities. So we need to be ready in some way, shape, or form. And so that is important for me to tell, because for many students coming in, they come from these kinds of realities, and they're trying to get to a better place, which is a very human thing to do. And I want to talk about this idea of two-eyed seeing, which is really just about seeing from 2 points of view unified in a single vision, and that's completely normal and natural. And this is important. Binocular vision is better than monocular vision, just because you get better depth of perception, a wider field of vision, and it's really great if you lose one of your eyes. And I hope the metaphor is clear to you. Certainly for Indigenous people, we hold two realities at once, easily, like without even thinking about it. We look backward at our gloried past. We hold timeless wisdom that we've inherited. And we look forward as well to our futures. We look at some of the incredible issues that are facing us. And I think looking forward and back at once is something that many of us do quite naturally, and it's a very, very beautiful thing. But two-eyed seeing also is about not just looking outward, but looking inward at once. And particularly, I think in health professions, we're taught to observe, to look at the person who's in front of you, who's asking for help. But are we asked to look inward? Can we live with the decisions that we've made, the work that we're doing? Certainly as Indigenous people, we are told to look inward, taught very actively to look inward, that you must be able to sit alone, to sit quietly, to endure, to pray, to be in ceremony, to be at peace with yourself, to be okay with your feelings, to reconcile what has come to pass. And I think this inner reflection is something that we've started to demand of the healthcare workers who work with our populations in our province, and I'll explain that in a bit. I think that when we have two visions at once, or two perspectives at once, we mustn't overemphasize when those visions collide or are disharmonious. In fact, most of the time, those two visions have synergy, and they can work together. Sometimes they clash, though, and I just want to start with clashing. This is my father. My father grew up in the bush, didn't learn English until he was a teenager. He was very insistent that I learn the ways of our people. He didn't say, this is what you need to know as an Indigenous boy. He just said, this is what you need to know. There's food here, and don't be stupid and starve. Here's where the fish are, here's how you catch fish, here's where the deer are, here's how you catch a deer. Here's how you be strong enough in order to carry that out, because it's actually quite hard. Here are some skills in a boat. And anyway, he taught me a lot, and he actively took me out of school because he thought school was a very strange construct to put children in a room and make them read a book for years. And he insisted that I get out on the land, and I think it was extremely wise of him, and he got in lots of trouble for it. And luckily, my father had resistance. He would say, who are you to tell me how to raise my kids? You know, my boy needs to know this land. It's what we've always done. And so, and the reason I put it up here is because when it came time for my boys, my dad's 81, he said, bring all the grandsons together, we're going into the territory. And my boy's mom, who's not Native and a teacher, said, you want me to send my beautiful boys out with an old man in weather with guns and knives and you're going to kill things? And I said, well, I've never heard it described like that, but yes. And she said, well, I'm their mother and I get to decide. And the answer is no. And we had to work it out. We had to work out this collision. This person I love very much had such an odd view of what was real. And it's absolutely crazy-making. And I know that training Indigenous people here at McGill, just like it is in every other university and every other school, is going to be crazy-making as those visions have the potential to come into collision. And the point of all this, of course, is to find balance. And I hope you understand this. The mother of my son said, no woman wants to be only a good mother. And I'm not going to mansplain what I think she meant. But to her, there was more to life than being a mom. And her career to her was, significant. And I absolutely understand that. What I also know, having been an actor for such a long time and knowing some very beautiful and very powerful people, and being a doctor for so long and knowing some extremely bright, well-trained people, is that those people are not necessarily good people, that they can be out of balance. So, I want to talk a bit about two-eyed seeing. I just want to first of all acknowledge Albert Marshall, who's a Mi'kmaq elder who tried to make this more conscious for us. Having indigenous knowledges and Western knowledges coexist. And by accepting and acknowledging that we hold two realities at once, we can make room for other realities. Part of my master's I did in Spain, and I don't know if you knew that Columbus was a Spaniard on an Italian ship, but he's greatly revered in Spain. But for us, the coming of that other vision to our territories was disastrous, for thousands of civilizations and tens of millions of indigenous people. And it's important to acknowledge that. I love this depiction of Columbus's arrival. These are supposedly the Taino people. This depiction is of his meeting with the Taino people on the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean. They used to wear colored clay for decorative reasons, but also maybe for sunblock. But here, they're supposedly wearing white clay, and I like it because it reminds me of the waves of disease, infectious disease that followed and really played havoc on those populations. This is a painting of the killing of Captain James Cook on February 14th in 1779 on the big island of Hawaii on the Kona coast. After his third visit to Hawaii, he had worn out his welcome, and he tried to force the local people to help him by kidnapping an ali'i named Kalenio Pu'u, and for his efforts, they killed him. On board this ship was a midshipman named George Vancouver, and George Vancouver, 13 years later, came to our coast on British Columbia and actually came to my mother's village. And I like to think that his experiences on the Big Island shaped him because he was much kinder to us than Cook was to the Hawaiians. This is my mother's village. This is a drawing by one of the artists aboard George Vancouver's ship. And of course, he came with two Spanish ships led by Galeano and Valdez y Flores. This is significant. This is my great-grandfather. His name was Atum. He was born in 1860, and in 1862, a smallpox epidemic ripped from San Francisco south and then up north as far as Alaska, killing tens of thousands of Native people in the space of 7 months. And of our 5 sister villages, 3 of them collapsed, including my great-grandfather's village. And in 1930, when this picture was taken, he was admitted to hospital with dementia. The physician in charge examined him and saw that he was covered with pox scars and that he was blind. Well, we knew that he was blind. Our family stories said, our great-grandfather was blind. He was a woodcutter. His daughters would lead him into the forest, and he would feel for wood, that fallen trees that he would then cut and sell for a living. So whenever I was, as a medical student, felt sorry for myself, I think, well, at least I'm not a blind woodcutter trying to eke out a living in 1830 or 1930. I like to say this because I think sometimes people don't think that we're connected to our past, and we are. And just as an aside, our word for tree, jeja, is the same word as for cousin. And much of our language is very friendly and warm to the outdoors. So even though I was outside and I would feel sorry for myself as a little kid for how hard it was to train under my father, the language that we spoke and our attitudes to the freezing cold water or to the snow and the rain was very peaceful. My mother went to residential school. In fact, my parents met in residential school. My father was on the run. The law of the time was children would be surrendered when they came of age, around 5 years old. My father was an orphan. His maternal grandmother felt she would die without him, so she kept him and she took him on the run. My mother went to residential school when she was 3, and she stayed until she was 15. And when they married immediately after school. My father asked my mother to make him fish head soup, which is really just boiling a fish head. But she didn't know to take the gills out. And my dad's grandmother, the wife of the blind man you saw, said, "Where did you find this woman? She knows nothing." And I think that's why my father insisted that we grow up with Indigenous knowledge. So this is a world that we've inherited. This is something that we all know. Aboriginal people, we come last in our own country. We used to own everything, and now we own hardly anything. And we come in last of any ethnic group and in this rich land that affords other Canadians an extremely high standard of living. And this report, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, was actually used in a custody battle between an Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal parent, the non-Aboriginal parent side saying, "See, Aboriginal communities are unfit places for children to live, and you must award custody to the non-Aboriginal person." And so, as much as this was an important report, it's also reductionist. To say that we are the poor cousins of other Canadians is not, in fact, completely true. And one of the reasons that I love to come out when I'm invited is I like to tell stories about how beautiful the people I'm from and how beautiful they are. And I hope you saw a snapshot of some of the beauty and the wealth and the strength of our peoples just in this short period. And it's very important for us to tell our beautiful realities, and not just tell our beautiful realities, but to live them. And that means that those Indigenous students who come here will have ceremonial and language responsibilities. They will be called back for funerals. They will be called back to help with family members, including children and elders. They will have lives, and that will be hard, I think, for the establishment to understand. But they are our citizens with very important functions. In fact, usually they're our stars, our absolute most beloved. And we send them here, and we don't want them treated like dogs, and we don't want them to be considered empty vessels to be filled. We have this incredible landscape last year and this year. We're talking about reconciliation. The Prime Minister of the country has made no bones about Indigenous people being an extremely high priority, certainly in the top 3. The federal and provincial and territorial ministers of health declared Indigenous health as their #1 priority in January of 2016. And it's a lovely time for us to be working in Indigenous health. This is where I work. I work in British Columbia, and I'm very aware that I'm not an expert of Indigenous health here at all. My job really is to kind of explain some of the work that we're doing so that we can allow you to dream about what some of the work could possibly come up with. These statistics really just show that we are quite diverse. We have 32 different First Nations languages, 203 different First Nations villages. We have Inuit and Métis. We have 1,600 Inuit in British Columbia, believe it or not. Half of our population is under the age of 25, so a lot of our efforts have to be geared towards young people. And this phenomenal diversity is hard to fathom, but it's there. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission asks us to look back at what happened to us. I was quite aware of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Argentina and Chile. I went to an international school. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were recordings of state-sanctioned human rights abuses in Chile and in Argentina against political activists and common people, usually poor people. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was in South Africa, post-apartheid, to record human rights abuses against people of color in that country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada was about the recording of human rights abuses against Indigenous children who are now adults, to record their experiences. It was a 6-year process, and it was very, very deliberate and an enormous construct. The tens of thousands of stories that they recorded are phenomenal. And I really honor them. In fact, I was named as an honorary witness to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they asked me again and again and again to talk about residential schools whenever I presented, and it took me actually a while to feel comfortable doing it as a, I guess, I hate the term intergenerational survivor, but definitely my parents went to residential school, and part of my work is absolutely colored by these realities. I really hate when people try and circumvent those stories of Indigenous realities, like a certain ridiculous senator who's trying to revise our histories to her own liking. And I will absolutely fight that ridiculous notion as much as I can. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this enormous process, gave us some very strong direction to try and address those violations against our children. In British Columbia, we have about 1,400 residential school survivors who are still left, including my parents. And my parents really resisted giving their testimonial for posterity. My mother really didn't want to talk about what happened to her in residential school, but I finally got her to commit after really almost 10 years of trying that she would meet a cameraman and he would record her stories. We did it at the last Truth and Reconciliation event in Vancouver. Hey, Dr. Kitty. The Truth and Reconciliation event in Vancouver was the very last event. And we were set to record on the last afternoon of the last day. But we never made it. We stopped by the archives, and there was a request to name children in photographs. And my mother, having been in residential school for 15 years, knew many of those unnamed children. So she stayed and she named them, and she missed her appointment. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, though, was very pointed. And I think when we face issues like how do we get the best out of Indigenous students who want to go into health professions, we go back to basic principles, that Aboriginal people are self-determining. I'll talk about that in a bit. And that we have a legacy of colonialism. And I hope that in the short time I've had with you that I've pointed to you that colonialism is real. It's not an imagining. We're not hallucinating. And the calls to action are very pointed as well, that we have Aboriginal healing practices. In BC, First Nations people run their own affairs. They run their own healthcare system. And when we spoke to the people, and we spoke to tens of thousands of Indigenous people, and we asked them, what do you need in your healthcare system? They said to us, we have ways of being and knowing that are real to us. We were taught how to be well when we were kids, and we don't want to give those up in order to have a colonial experience with the healthcare system. And we believe in holism, that the mind and the body and the spirit are connected, and if your new system only focuses on our bodies, then it's committing a grievous error. The heart and the mind and the body are one. Call to action number 71 asks us to look at the deaths of Aboriginal children. The official death toll from residential schools in Canada is 3,000. But in my province, and my office is in charge of this, we're looking at the death records of 4,900 children alone. And it's a very somber, horrible task to read about the deaths of 4,900 children. And so when someone gives me this baloney like, oh, wasn't it really fun at residential school? Wasn't it like a day camp? I say, yeah, 4,900 deaths. You read those reports with me. And we call upon all levels of government to increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field, to ensure the retention of Aboriginal healthcare providers in Aboriginal communities, and to provide cultural competency training for healthcare professionals. And certainly my organization does exactly that. We actually require 100,000 healthcare workers in British Columbia to take a course on Indigenous cultural competency. It's called, they signed a Declaration of Cultural Safety and Humility for Indigenous populations. And it's moving. So let me tell you a bit about that. But I want to start by saying that knowledge is a sacred cow, and my problem will be how can we milk her while keeping clear of her horns? And certainly education has an incredible upside and has a bit of downside. So we want the milk and not the horns, and certainly we want that for our trainees who are going to be here at this hallowed institution. So cultural unsafety is when we diminish, demean, or disempower the cultural identity and well-being of an individual, whether they be our clients or they be our students. I actually hate the word clients because Indigenous healthcare professionals look after their cousins. You're my cousin, even though we share no DNA. If you were in my office or I was in your, well, actually, I guess I wouldn't be delivering in your office, but you can be in my office. And I would treat you like my cousin and not like a customer or a client. And so that feeling, that benevolence of I will treat you like my family member is part of an Indigenous healthcare professional's reality. And we demand, well, we demand from our 100,000 workers in British Columbia that clinicians provide an open and respectful interaction every single time. Every single time. So cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, that we need to know what has brought us to where we are, and that this is a relationship that we bring not only our own reality, but we are in a relationship. There is another person there, and so it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue, and it's based on mutual trust. And our declaration of cultural safety and humility, this requirement by our 100,000 healthcare workers in British Columbia to be aware of Indigenous realities, was also signed by all of the colleges, all of the health disciplines, including the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the College of Registered Nurses. So all of their licensees are committed to cultural safety and humility for Indigenous populations as well. The First Nations Health Authority is quite a large organization, health service organization that looks after Indigenous people. We certainly work from a place of respect, understanding, accountability. We're very patient-focused. We really support Indigenous practices. We used to be Health Canada, and on the first day when Health Canada handed over all of their resources to First Nations and our First Nations Health Authority, one of the former Health Canada employees came up and we cut his tie off. And we said, we cease being a federal bureaucracy and we will become an Indigenous organization. And we had to learn to sing. So I was so glad to see the young people singing. It's a phenomenally generous act to sing for someone. It's very hard to do. And I know because I had to go from being a chief medical officer doing doctorly things to someone who could hold ceremony and sing because that was a requirement of my work. And we say it starts with me. Healthcare workers must be able to speak up about racism, about colonialism, about violence and intimidation that's occurring around them. And that includes our training grounds. So at McGill, we should expect that we can ask the question, what's happening here? Is something bad happening, or does something bad happen? And here are some of the signatories, our 23 health regulators, our health professions. our coroner service, and all of our health authorities who hire those 100,000 healthcare workers. And really at the heart of it is nothing about us without us. We shouldn't be making policy about patients without patients being in the room. And just to give a very small story, as a young medical student, I had this elder nurse, senior nurse, said to me, "You're First Nations?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, I used to work in a First Nations community. We used to have to tie women in labor to their beds. And I said, "What? You would tie a laboring woman to her bed?" And he said, "Yeah, because they wanted to squat when they were giving birth. So they would force them to lie and deliver on their backs." And that's an example of a policy made about us without us. And of course, I hope you can see that that's actually utterly ridiculous. Nothing about us without us is actually just a really simple way of saying what UNDRIP says, which is the right to self-determine. And self-determination at a personal level is the right of the individual to lead their own lives without interference from other individuals. At a political level, it's the right of a nation to chart its own course without interference from other nations. It's a very simple concept. And here's a quote from someone that you must know, Chief Robert Joseph. "At one point, if you drew a circle, the medicine people were Aboriginal, the medicine was Aboriginal, nurses, teachers were Aboriginal, but as colonization evolved and you looked at the circle, there were no Aboriginals." And so these healthcare workers that we propose training are actually already part of Indigenous realities and Indigenous circles. And McGill has agreed to help them upgrade their skills, as opposed to being the gatekeeper to them working with us and our families. So when I was a medical student, I remember I had been an actor for a long time. You have to learn physical exam. You have to learn to examine a breast. And they don't give you real people to examine right away. They gave us fake breasts, and I was playing with my little fake boob. I gave it a voice, and I was trying to make people laugh. And the surgeon came in, this wonderful surgeon who I grew to love very much and respect very much, came in and she said, yeah, laugh all you want, but if you miss a lump and your patient dies from cancer, you have to be able to sleep at night. I was absolutely appalled. I thought, how does an idiot like me suddenly get in charge of cancer? But I had to play my part. And so for any students who are coming up, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm in charge of that, is a completely normal part of the process. And there's my timer saying I have only a few minutes. So I became a physician, and I went back to my hometown of Vancouver. I went to St. Paul's Hospital, 500 doctors in a downtown urban hospital. I got my little electronic pass to go to the doctor's lounge, and I just stood there. I thought, after all my work, I'm here. I'm back home, and I'm working here. And I had only been there for like less than 5 minutes, and the security guard came up to me and he said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm really sorry to do this, but one of the doctors has said there's an Indian in the doctor's lounge." I looked exactly like this: white coat, stethoscope, shirt and tie, ponytail. And I wasn't hurt, because at medical school I found a lot of racism, more racism than I had ever had as an actor or as a child or as someone just living an ordinary life. I said, yeah, you better get used to it. So the challenge is the difference in health outcomes between First Nations and other Canadians is unacceptable. It's actually unsustainable. The patriarchy hurts all of us. Hurting Indigenous clients hurts everyone. It's unethical and immoral to protect the status quo. We should not have race-based outcomes and disparities that we are not addressing. That's the work. In British Columbia, we have a number of commitments. That's all this is. These are just signed agreements that certain work will get done. And before we had these formal agreements, we would meet and we would say, oh, we should really look after Indigenous people. Wouldn't it be great if we could do something for Indigenous communities? And everyone would say, yeah, that'd be a good thing. But not a lot would get done, or not as much as when we signed these work plans and said, these are our commitments. And the commitments were actually quite large. When we started talking to the health authorities, they would come up with these small commitments like, oh yeah, we could hire an Indigenous person to work on Indigenous health. And we said, actually, we're 3.6% of 4.8 million people. Maybe more than one hire, maybe 5 hires, maybe 20 hires, just to begin is a place to start. And so it starts with me. We have our own views about what our health means, how it can get better, and it's very important to hear that voice. And at UBC, we have an Aboriginal medical doctorate admissions. We currently have, when I was there, we had 36 Aboriginal medical students, about 9 in every year. And again, the milk, not the horns. This is a European ritual. I have no idea what it means, but I'm very respectful of it. So we have 14 seats for qualified Aboriginal applicants every year. We've graduated 50, or our goal was to graduate 50 physicians by 2020. And by 2015, we had graduated 54 Aboriginal physicians. And it's been really wonderful work. I think what's really important, though, about the work of training Indigenous physicians is that, like I said, they are our stars, and they're very important to us, and they carry significant roles that are not a part of their physicianhood. We're not in a factory, a cookie cutter factory, pumping out people in professions. That's certainly not the point. And in our work, when we talk to our partners, because we have many partners in Indigenous health, it's not just Indigenous people carving off Indigenous population to look after Indigenous people. We rely on our allies. We rely on post-secondary institutions. We rely on the government to help us. We make lists of actions. That's a significant part of our work. But we also ask about governance. Who's in charge of that? And so we would negotiate who's in charge of, say, Indigenous cancer, and it was clearly the BC Cancer Agency. They were meant to look after all people on a cancer journey. We didn't want an Indigenous cancer center. We knew that when it came to looking after grandma, that we were going to do that. We weren't going to farm that out to government to look after our elders. Our elders are taken care of by us in our homes, and we give them aspirin, and we help them to the washroom. And so we said, we're the leads on elder care. But at one of the negotiating tables, we had an infant who had passed away from SIDS. And the chief coroner herself was there, the chief coroner for the province of British Columbia. And she said, we asked for these infants, for our infants, to be returned to us in a timely fashion. And she said, well, actually, by law, it's called the BC Coroners Act, I am allowed to keep this infant body for as long as I see fit in order to determine a cause of death. And I'm allowed to do pathology on the body, and I can take parts of that infant, keep them for up to 8 weeks, and whatever's left that's not been dissected, I can return to you at the end of 8 weeks. So you can either have, hold the infant body for 8 weeks until all of the parts come back, or whatever's left comes back, or you can have 2 burials. And the chief said, we know you think you're in charge, but we think that's our baby. And the lights went on for me. Our bodies, our babies, our families. Of course we should be at the table. Of course we have a say. And so you will be training our workers to take on these very significant roles. I was very lucky to go to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, which is 80% African American. There were no African Americans in my Master's of Public Health class. I was very vocal about that The Americans in my class, I think, thought I was very strange, but I think in Canada we're taught to be vocal about inequity. I really believe that. I didn't stay quiet, and people didn't like that. But one of my instructors, her name was Kamara Jones, an extraordinary woman, told a very simple story called The Gardener's Tale. And so I've changed it slightly. The gardener notices that pink flowers flourish and grow taller, while red flowers languish and are shorter. But she's forgotten her original decision to separate the seeds into two types of soil, one rich and one poor. And she's sadly come to the conclusion to prefer pink over red. And so let me be clear, you are the gardeners, and it's time to make things right in the garden. I was lucky when I was a kid, even though I had lost my sister in this horrible accident and we all tried so hard to recover. My father said, you are cursed. We are cursed. Someone has put a hex on us, and that's why bad things have happened to us. But we can call our spirits back. No matter what has happened to us, we can take our soul back, our spirit back, our mind back, our heart back. We can heal, and we are empowered. So heal yourself and be empowered. And I say that to people all the time. And of course, culture has a place in that kind of healing. Of course, ceremony is a part of that recovery from that kind of trauma or sadness or change in one's status. And a traditional life is always better than a colonized one, and I hope that we're not going to give colonized experiences to our students here. And I want to end with a small story about this beautiful woman whom I love very much. I won't name the village, but it's one that's known to some of you. This very beautiful elder woman who taught me to dance when I was a teenager came in at like 20 minutes before the end of my rotation. I was leaving on the ferry literally that night to go to my sister's graduation. This beautiful woman came in her 80s. She was literally the oldest woman in the village, and she was in atrial fibrillation, which is really problematic because it can degenerate into a fatal rhythm very, very fast. And the doctor I was handing over to said, I have to send you to Vancouver to a cardiac care unit. We have nothing here in this little village. I don't even have a heart monitor. And she said, no, I want to die here. Don't send me. And he said, I have to. And I said, I'll stay, I'll look after her, I'll be her heart monitor, I'll just hold her hand and feel her pulse, and if anything changes, I know what to do. So I stayed with her all night. It was my second night on call, my second night without sleep. I don't know if any of you have ever done a 56-hour shift instead of the usual 36. I was losing my mind, and I told everyone up and down, don't you touch her, don't you scream and lay yourself on top of her, don't you wail and interrupt her sleep, she needs her rest. And then the next morning, she's spontaneously converted to a normal rhythm. And I left, and my family hated me. I'd missed yet another event, and I was exhausted. It felt like weeks to regain my balance. But their family member came up to me months later, and they said, oh, remember that night you saved our grandmother? And I said, please don't say that. I feel so humiliated when you say that. I didn't save her. She got better by herself. I did nothing. And they said, no, she willed herself to live. She didn't want to die on your watch and scare you to death. And I learned so much from that experience, that the point of our training is not to get fancy letters or to posture as an expert, but to become extraordinary human beings that our people would be proud of. I sit on the expert group on the potential healthcare and biomedical roles for deep space human flight. I do, with the Canadian Space Agency. Deep space, human space flight. The Canadian Space Agency is even interested in reconciliation. And the Canadian Space Agency is trying to figure out its role in the Deep Space Gateway and sending a Canadian astronaut to Mars and back in 2030. And I certainly hope, and it's certainly very real to me, that that could be an Indigenous physician astronaut, and we talk about that. And I just thought I would say that our aspirations for our young people are very, very high. And to get where we need to go, sometimes we need to fly in a different way. I showed this to my elder, and she said, "Oh, that eagle's getting ready to mate." And I said, "What?" And she explained that eagles fly up really high, and they tangle together, and they mate, and they come apart before they hit the ground. And I said, "Oh, that's not quite what I was trying to say." And she said, "Yeah, that's a sexy eagle." So please, be the sexy eagle, be the change that needs to happen. Thank you very much.